A GMO, or genetically modified organism, is an organism whose genetic characteristics have been altered using the techniques of genetic engineering. Since their creation in the 1980s, GMOs have become one of the food industry's most controversial topics. But what exactly does it mean to be genetically modified, and why is it such a big deal? Ever since humans evolved from hunting and gathering to agriculture, farmers have struggled for the greatest crop yield. Factors such as drought, extreme temperatures, pests, and weeds have each had an impact on food production and profits. As scientists learn more about DNA and genetics, they are able to apply their new discoveries to major world problems, such as hunger and malnutrition. The biotech industry, namely Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, and Dow, recognized that in order to feed an increasing population, something about the current food production methods will have to change. Corporations such as Monsanto found ways to alter the genetic makeup of plants with the hopes of increasing crop yield. However, anti-GMO activists across the world protested the rise of these so-called frankenfoods. Many were fearful of the impact GMOs would have on our health and the environment. This video will look at what GMOs are, the different types of GMOs, how they work, what they accomplish, and the controversies behind them. DNA consists of 4 nucleotides that combine to form the 2 strands of the double helix. Segments of this double helix that code for particular proteins are known as genes. DNA is transcribed into mRNA, which is then translated into proteins. A change in the DNA, such as a mutation, can code for different proteins. When one nucleotide of DNA is switched for another, a very different protein can be produced. If the wrong protein is produced, the plant will act differently. Scientists take advantage of this when creating genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. They can control plant behavior by changing the plant's DNA. Once biotech corporations recognized that they could alter plant behavior by rearranging genes, GMOs were born. It all began with the Flavor Saver tomato. In the 1980s, a biotech startup out of Davis, California, discovered a method to combine their knowledge of DNA and genetics with food preservation. The biotech startup, called Calgene, engineered a way to knock out a certain protein so that it was no longer expressed. Why was this important? Well, it turns out that the ripening rate of tomatoes can be determined by one protein, called polygalacturonase, or PG. This PG is an enzyme that breaks down the cell walls in tomatoes, speeding up the ripening process. Calgene discovered a method to inhibit the production of PG protein. In doing so, the tomatoes no longer produce PG, and the tomato would take longer to ripen. These tomatoes with inhibited PG production were called Flavor Saver tomatoes. The idea was that the Flavor Saver tomatoes could be picked when ripe and then wouldn't spoil or damage on the way to the store. Tomatoes are often picked when green and then ripened during the shipping process, but Calgene thought by reducing the levels of PG, the tomato would stay firm longer. In 1992, after 5 years of testing and developing Flavor Saver tomatoes, The U.S. Department of Agriculture deemed them no longer a plant pest risk and allowed them to be put on the market. However, the flavor-saver tomatoes did not successfully delay the ripening process, and they were only commercially for sale from 1994 to 1997. There are several types of GMOs already used by farmers, and even more are being developed. The most popular genetically modified crops on the market are those with herbicide tolerance and insect resistance. This image shows the top 10 genetically modified foods grown and sold in the United States. Herbicide-tolerant GMOs are called Roundup Ready. They allow farmers to spray Roundup on fields to kill the weeds, but keep the crops. There are also genetically modified plants that are engineered to produce their own insecticide, called Bt. Plants such as Bt corn or Bt cotton were made to benefit farmers because they kill harmful insects without the use of pesticides. Scientists have also engineered GMOs to have a higher nutritional value. Finally, genetically modified crops can be engineered to withstand environmental stresses, such as drought, freezes, heat, and acidic or salty soil. Around the same time that the flavor-saver tomatoes were being developed, a major biotech corporation known as Monsanto was creating its first Roundup Ready crops. Roundup, Monsanto's popular herbicide, has been on the market since 1974. In 1996, Monsanto found a way to use genetic engineering to capitalize even more on its herbicide spray.
It might sound strange, but Roundup is a weed killer that actually kills the weeds from the inside out. After Roundup is applied to the weed, it sticks to the leaf. Then Roundup enters the plant. Roundup mixes with the sap stream of the weed. Roundup is transported around the entire plant, including the deepest roots. It stops the weed's ability to grow. And finally, the weed starves to death.
Farmers and private homeowners have been using Roundup on weeds for decades. However, Monsanto saw that the herbicide could be even more effective if instead of killing all plants, it targeted the harmful weeds and allowed the desired crops to survive. This way, larger amounts of Roundup could be sprayed over a whole field of crop and only kill the weeds, creating a higher yield. Thanks to the Roundup Ready technology of GMOs, these crop dusters can spray herbicide over the entire field and only kill the weeds. To do so, the genetic makeup of the desired crops has to be rearranged in order to resist the herbicide. Roundup contains glyphosate, which was discovered in 1970 by Monsanto scientists to kill a broad spectrum of plants. Glyphosate works to inhibit the synthesis of 3 specific amino acids. Those of you who have taken biology know that amino acids are the monomers of proteins. When these 3 amino acids are inhibited, the plant cannot make the protein it needs, and it dies. Scientists have found an enzyme that is glyphosate tolerant. In other words, this enzyme allows plants to synthesize the 3 amino acids, even in the presence of glyphosate. These scientists can then take the genetic information from the enzyme and put it into plants. The plants then become resistant to glyphosate. When a farmer sprays Roundup on them, they don't die. These genetically modified plants are called Roundup Ready. Their seeds are patented and sold by biotech corporations. To learn more about plant tissue culture and how GMOs work, I interviewed Peggy Lameau, Department Chair of Plant and Microbial Biology at UC Berkeley.
If I wanted to recreate a human, could I just take cells from the inside of my cheek or from my ear and then put it on some media and then cue it and tell it, oh, form a human? No, you can't do that. But plant cells can do that. So you can take a cell from a leaf, even from roots in some cases, stem, and you can trigger that single cell to divide, and then it kind of makes what looks like an amorphous mass of cells, sort of like grits. And then by cueing it with certain hormones, you can remind it that it was a plant. So you introduce a gene that allows it to grow on a media that if cells don't have that gene, they will die. And so what you see on these plates are just these big pieces of dead tissue, and then all of a sudden a little leaf will come out, and you're just like, wow. And then you can move that leaf onto another media and it'll form roots.
I drew a picture to help show what Peggy is describing. As shown in the picture, scientists can take a cell from a leaf of a plant and put it in a media. Scientists can then change the DNA of the plant cells within the media. Through a series of steps, the plant cells in the media will then grow into new plants.
So the implication of that is that then every cell in that plant will have that gene that you introduced, and that's sort of the magic of genetic engineering.
GMOs that produce their own insecticide are called Bt crops. Bt, or Bacillus thuringiensis, is a bacterium that naturally exists in soil. The insecticide was commercially available as a spray or powder beginning in the 1950s. In the 1990s, scientists found a way to insert the DNA of the Bt bacterium into plant cells so that the plants could produce their own insecticide. Using tissue culture, they were then able to grow plants with the Bt DNA. Theoretically, farmers growing Bt crops now don't have to spray insecticides on their fields because the plants produce their own. Peggy Lameau from UC Berkeley encourages the application of Bt GMOs in developing countries.
I mean, if they have an insect, something attacked them, they don't have 16 different pesticides that they can use. They lose their whole crop. So if I can build into their crop, and it doesn't have to be corn, it could be cassava, or it could be whatever, beans, or some native crop. If I can put a single gene in there and protect that crop from some insect attack and give them some security for their food, I would really like to be able to do that.
There are currently many Bt plants, but the most common are Bt corn, tobacco, and rice. The main idea behind GMOs is to have a better crop yield. As the population increases, available land decreases, and we struggle to grow enough food to feed the world. Biotech corporations such as Monsanto and DuPont promise higher crop yields for farmers who purchase and grow genetically modified crops. However, according to a study from the University of Washington, this claim might not be true. The study compared GM and non-GM corn grown on test plots. Between 1990 and 2010, a few GM corn varieties had greater yields than the non-GM, but others produced less. The authors of the study said, "We are surprised not to find strongly positive transgenic yield effects." In other words, they were surprised to see that the more food argument for GMOs was not necessarily true. As GMOs become more prevalent in our food supply and reach even more countries around the world, everyday consumers are questioning the impacts that genetically modified crops have on human health. After extensive research from both biotech companies and anti-GMO activists, experts have yet to come to a consensus. Scientists on both sides of the GMO debate claim to have evidence backing their arguments. I interviewed several people involved with GMOs. I talked to a biotech professor at UC Davis, another biotech professor from Stanford, a BT corn salesman from Iowa, an employee at Whole Foods, and a rice farmer from California. The only person who allowed me to record them was Peggy Lameau from UC Berkeley. The others were weary of the controversial nature of GMOs and did not want to be recorded. Studies conducted by the anti-GMO side say that the introduction of GMOs to the food supply correlates with the recent rise of chronic diseases and allergy rates. One such investigation in Russia found that hamsters fed on genetically modified soy for 3 generations suffered from significant disabilities. After 2 years, most of the hamsters on the high GMO diet were infertile, had stunted growth, and had decreased offspring survival rate. Studies conducted on rats in France had similar results. These findings could be important because 91% of the soybeans grown in America are genetically modified, so any related health issues could affect a large percent of the population. According to the Institute of Responsible Technology, soy allergies in the UK increased by 50% soon after genetically modified soy was introduced. One possible explanation for this is that cooked genetically modified soy contains as much as 7 times the amount of a known soy allergen as traditional soy. One issue with Roundup Ready crops is that they encourage farmers to use even more herbicide. Since Roundup Ready corn or soybeans are resistant to the herbicide, farmers are spraying more on their fields. In 2007, Monsanto made claims in France that their herbicide was biodegradable and that it left the soil clean after use. It has been proven by several studies funded by ecological companies that glyphosate is in fact harmful to amphibians and does not break down in the environment. The French court had Monsanto revoke these false advertisements shortly after. Another consequence of genetic engineering is the rise of superweeds, unwanted weeds that become immune to the Roundup and can no longer be killed by the herbicide. Both biotech professors I talked to feared Roundup will no longer be of use within the next 5 years. Farmers will then have to use stronger herbicides, which are more harmful to the environment. Many other scientists predict the rise of super insects, insects that will have become immune to the Bt produced by GMOs. Bt will no longer be effective, and farmers will have to resort to stronger, more damaging pesticides. A recent movement to require GMO labeling has begun in the United States. Labels would allow consumers to see which products in grocery stores contain GMOs. Over 60 countries around the world label all products containing GMOs. The only way for shoppers in the United States to know for certain if something is GMO-free is if it is certified organic. Prop 37 in California and Prop 522 in Washington State would have required labeling, but both lost by a narrow margin. Still, organizations such as the Non-GMO Project and grocery stores such as Whole Foods support the labeling campaign. Whole Foods promises to label all products by 2018. The controversy behind GMOs continues. While biotech corporations promote their potential to increase crop yield, others are concerned about their health and environmental impacts, among other things. The next time you go to the grocery store, consider what it is you are purchasing.